Right now, as you watch this, thousands of silent machines are racing across the sky, invisible to most people, yet shaping the future of how humanity connects, learns, and survives. And the question is not why there are so many of them, but why there could never be enough. When people first hear about Starlink, they often assume the idea is excessive, even wasteful, imagining a cluttered sky filled with unnecessary technology. But that assumption collapses the moment you understand the problem Starlink is trying to solve. The challenge was never about placing a few satellites above Earth. It was about bending the rules of distance, time, and physics so that information could move as freely as thought itself. Earth is not flat, it is curved, and that single fact changes everything. A signal sent from space does not spread infinitely. It touches only a limited slice of the planet before fading away. And once you accept that truth, the logic behind massive satellite constellations becomes unavoidable. Imagine standing on a beach and shining a flashlight straight ahead. No matter how powerful it is, the beam eventually disappears beyond the curve of the horizon. Satellites face the same limitation, except the stakes are higher because people depend on the signal for work, education, safety, and opportunity. Each satellite can only see a small footprint of Earth at any moment. And as it races along its orbit, that footprint constantly shifts. This is where coverage geometry comes in, a quiet mathematical reality that does not care about opinions or budgets. For uninterrupted global internet, the coverage areas of satellites must overlap like scales on armor, ensuring there are no gaps where the signal drops into silence. More satellites do not mean repetition, they mean continuity. They mean that when one satellite moves out of range, another is already there, waiting to take over without the user ever noticing the handoff. This idea reflects a mindset that values resilience over simplicity, a way of thinking often associated with Elon Musk and the philosophy of building systems that can survive failure rather than pretend it will never happen. Starlink is not designed for perfect conditions. It is designed for storms, mountains, oceans, deserts, and places the internet forgot. The math behind it is elegant in its honesty. Lower orbits reduce latency, making the internet feel faster and more natural. But they also shrink each satellite's coverage area, which means more satellites are required to blanket the planet. It is a trade-off, and Starlink chooses speed and reliability over minimalism, because a slow connection everywhere is less valuable than a fast connection that truly reaches everyone. As the constellation grows, something fascinating happens that most people never consider. Reliability increases not because the system becomes more complex, but because it becomes more forgiving. Redundancy in this context is not waste. It is insurance written into the architecture of the network. If a satellite fails, the system does not panic, it adapts. Data regardless. Signals shift. The user keeps watching, working, or learning, unaware that a small crisis was absorbed and neutralized above their head. This is not accidental. It is the result of understanding Earth's curvature, orbital mechanics, and probability, then turning those constraints into strengths. Halfway through this realization, a deeper tension emerges, one that creates suspense not in the sky, but in the human story unfolding beneath it. We are building systems so vast that no single person can see them whole, yet we rely on them more each day. The same network that delivers entertainment also carries emergency calls, medical data, and the voices of people who would otherwise be isolated. The question quietly forming is not whether this approach works, but what happens if we stop pushing it forward? A planet with uneven access to information becomes a planet divided by opportunity, and once that divide hardens, it becomes painfully difficult to undo. Starlink's swarm of satellites is, at its core, a response to that risk. The math behind global coverage is not just numbers on a page, it is a statement about inclusion. Each additional satellite reduces the odds that someone, somewhere, is left offline when it matters most. The curvature of Earth demands this scale, and physics enforces it without compromise. You can argue aesthetics, cost, or ambition, but you cannot argue with geometry. When you connect the equations to real human outcomes, the constellation stops looking excessive and starts looking necessary. This first layer of understanding changes how you see the night sky. Those moving points of light are not clutter. They are continuity in motion, a promise that distance does not have to equal disadvantage. They represent a belief that technology should adapt to humanity, not the other way around. And that belief sets the stage for a much larger question still waiting ahead, one that challenges how far we are willing to go to make connection a basic feature of life rather than a privilege reserved for the lucky few. That question lingers because every technological leap forces society to confront its priorities, and Starlink exposes them clearly. It asks whether we value universal access enough to build at planetary scale, whether patience exists for long-term systems, and whether imagination can outweigh fear. The answer is forming silently above us, orbit by orbit, connection by connection, reshaping expectations without asking permission across generations yet. Forward. There comes a moment, once the basic logic settles in, when the mind starts to feel uneasy, because understanding why something works also forces you to confront what it implies. Starlink is not merely a technical solution. It is a statement about scale, patience, and the willingness to think beyond conventional limits. When satellites fly low over Earth, they do not linger politely over one place. They rush forward at thousands of miles per hour, obeying orbital mechanics with indifference to human schedules. That speed is both a gift and a problem. It allows data to travel faster, reducing lag to near-terrestrial levels. But it also means that no single satellite can serve one location for long. The system survives only because another satellite is already on the way, and another after that, forming an endless chain of responsibility that never sleeps. This is where the math deepens and the tension rises. Each orbit intersects others at calculated angles, designed so that coverage overlaps just enough to avoid gaps, yet not so much that resources are wasted. It is a balancing act that lives at the edge of chaos, because space is not empty and time is not forgiving. Every object in orbit must be tracked, predicted, and coordinated, and the margin for error shrinks as the constellation grows. This is not redundancy for comfort. It is redundancy for survival. The system assumes that something will go wrong, and instead of collapsing under that assumption, it is built around it. That philosophy echoes a broader approach to innovation often associated with Elon Musk, where failure is not treated as an exception, but as an input, something to be learned from and designed around rather than feared. As viewers absorb this, suspense begins to build, not from danger alone, but from responsibility. If global internet truly depends on thousands of moving parts working in harmony, then the future becomes both powerful and fragile at the same time. The geometry of coverage reveals that there is no single point of control. The network is distributed, resilient, and constantly adapting. Yet that same distribution means accountability is shared across systems too complex for simple oversight. Signals hop from satellite to satellite, guided by algorithms that calculate paths in milliseconds, optimizing for speed, reliability, and load. The user experiences this as simplicity, a clean connection that just works. But beneath that calm surface is a storm of computation and coordination. The curvature of Earth continues to assert itself, forcing the network to stretch wider and denser as it reaches toward the poles, oceans, and remote regions where traditional infrastructure never made sense economically. Here, more satellites equal reliability, not because they repeat the same job, but because they create options. Options are what keeps systems alive under stress. If weather interferes, if interference occurs, if a satellite degrades or fails entirely, the network reroutes without ceremony. The user may never know how close they came to losing service, and that invisibility is the point. Reliability is not about perfection, it is about recovery. As the constellation expands, another layer of suspense emerges, quieter but heavier. Humanity is placing unprecedented trust in orbital infrastructure, trusting that coordination will outpace congestion, that innovation will outpace regulation, and that intention will outpace misuse. The math behind global coverage does not judge these choices, it simply enables them. It tells us what is possible, not what is wise. This is where philosophy enters the equation, because technology at this scale inevitably reshapes behavior. Access to information changes how people learn, how they organize, how they challenge authority, and how they imagine their own potential. Starlink satellites are not just transmitting data, they are transmitting possibility. Every additional satellite slightly lowers the barrier between curiosity and knowledge, between isolation and participation. Yet with that possibility comes a question that lingers uncomfortably. What happens when connection becomes so ubiquitous that silence itself feels unnatural? Suspense tightens because the system is still growing, still experimental, still proving itself in real time. There is no historical blueprint for a privately built, globally spanning internet in low Earth orbit. The math predicts coverage, but it cannot predict culture. It cannot predict how societies will change when geography matters less than ever before. As the constellation grows denser, latency drops further, and reliability increases, the difference between being connected and disconnected becomes more stark. That contrast may inspire progress, or it may deepen divides if access is unevenly distributed. The design allows for inclusion, but inclusion is a choice that must be continuously defended. Understanding this transforms the story from one of engineering into one of intention. The satellites do not care who uses them. They follow equations and orbits with mechanical loyalty. The responsibility lies with the humans who deploy them, regulate them, and decide who benefits first. The suspense is not about whether the math works, because it does. The suspense is about whether humanity can align its values with its capabilities. Each satellite launch pushes that question higher into the sky, making it impossible to ignore. The constellation becomes a mirror, reflecting not just technical ambition, but ethical ambition as well. And as viewers sit with that realization, the system begins to feel less like a product and more like a test, one that measures whether we can build at planetary scale without losing sight of the individuals beneath the orbits. The answer is not yet written, but it is being calculated every second, traced by moving points of light that remind us that reliability is earned, not assumed, and that connection, once expanded, reshapes everything it touches. As the story reaches its final stretch, everything comes into focus with a clarity that feels both empowering and unsettling, because the realization settles in that this system was never just about faster internet, but about redefining what connection means on a planetary scale. When you look up and imagine thousands of satellites moving in silent precision, you are not witnessing chaos. You are witnessing coordination made visible, geometry transformed into opportunity. The curvature of Earth, once a limitation that isolated communities and slowed progress, becomes a design constraint that inspired something larger, something persistent. Each satellite traces a path dictated by physics, yet together they form a living network that adapts in real time, proving that scale does not have to mean fragility. The suspense that once hovered around feasibility now shifts toward impact. What does it mean when access to information is no longer bound by cables, borders, or terrain? It means that a student in a remote village can learn at the same speed as someone in a major city. That innovation no longer waits for infrastructure to arrive, and that ideas can spread as freely as signals bouncing across the sky. This is where the philosophy behind the technology becomes undeniable. The system accepts that Earth is curved, that satellites move, that failures will happen, and instead of fighting those truths, it builds around them. That mindset, often echoed in discussions surrounding Elon Musk, is less about dominance and more about adaptation, less about control and more about resilience. Reliability emerges not from eliminating risk, but from distributing it so widely that no single failure can silence the whole. The math behind global coverage becomes a quiet teacher, reminding us that progress is rarely about doing less, but about doing enough everywhere, all the time. As the constellation grows, so does the responsibility to use it wisely. The suspense resolves into a challenge directed not at engineers, but at society itself. Technology this powerful amplifies intent, whether that intent is education, collaboration, creativity, or something darker. The satellites do not choose. They enable. They deliver data with the same indifference, whether it carries hope or harm. That neutrality places a burden on users, creators, and leaders to shape outcomes deliberately. Understanding why more satellites equal reliability reveals a deeper lesson. Systems designed for continuity require values designed for stewardship. The network's strength lies in its redundancy, but redundancy without purpose becomes noise. With purpose, it becomes resilience. The final realization is that Starlink's architecture mirrors a philosophy of human progress that is increasingly necessary in a complex world. Problems are no longer isolated, solutions are no longer small, and impact is no longer local. To connect a planet, you must think like a planet, embracing scale without losing empathy. Each satellite passing overhead is a reminder that geometry can unite what geography once divided, and that patience, repetition, and precision can outperform shortcuts. The Earth continues to curve beneath the network, unchanged by ambition, yet fully integrated into it. The sky becomes infrastructure, and infrastructure becomes possibility. As this understanding settles, the motivation becomes personal. Connection is not just something we consume, it is something we contribute to by how we use it, protect it, and expand it. The future hinted at by this constellation is not guaranteed, but it is reachable, orbit by orbit, decision by decision. When you grasp the math, the philosophy, and the intent together, the system stops feeling abstract and starts feeling inevitable, not because it must exist, but because the need it answers is real and growing. The story closes not with an ending, but with an invitation to think bigger, to question assumptions, and to recognize that reliability, whether in technology or in life, is built through thoughtful repetition and shared responsibility. If you're benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.